Welcome to Inside Economics. I'm Mark Sandy, the chief economist of Moody's Analytics. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Ryan Sweet. Ryan's the director of real-time economics. Big day for Ryan, Jobs Day. We'll come back to that in just a minute. A lot to talk about there. Of course, I'm talking about the employment report for the month of August. A little disappointing, but we'll come back to that. And then Adam Kamins. Adam runs our regional economic analysis, and he's here today to help, of course, dissect the jobs numbers. A lot to talk about there regionally, and also given Hurricane Ida, which really made a mess of things here in Philadelphia and much of the country. We want to talk about that, and also just more broadly about how we assess natural disasters and consider their economic impact. And both Adam and Ryan have done a lot of work in this area over the years, so we're going to talk about that as well. Did you guys get any damage from Ida? Did you navigate things pretty well, or any problems?
We held up fine. The Brandywine Creek, which is right near us, really overflowed, flooded a bunch of businesses, and I just can't imagine. I mean, I felt like we got hit hard. I can't imagine what Louisiana went through when that thing made landfall. I mean, that was a massive storm.
I know. I mean, we didn't really have the wind. We had a little bit of wind, but it was really the rain. My gosh.
Yeah, it was a lot of rain.
Yeah, I'm on high ground, my home, but I have a stream. And when I say stream, I mean a stream, just like a stream, maybe 30, 35 years downhill. And that thing was raging. I've been in this home more than 20 years. I've never seen anything like it. My next door neighbor, who's on lower ground, lost all of their back door stuff, chairs and benches and kids' playthings, and all gone. Pretty amazing. Adam, did you navigate pretty well through the whole thing?
We did all right. The worst effect for us was that the kids had to stay home yesterday, so it got a little ugly in our house. But other than that, no damage.
Oh, they couldn't go to school?
No, they closed schools yesterday.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, we'll come back to Ida and the economic damage. You put together some estimates. Well, maybe give us a preview. What's the bottom line estimate of the property damage and the lost economic output for the Northeast?
Right. So the top, sort of the putting it all together, kind of the storm as a whole, it was 40 billion, give or take, about 5 or 6 billion. So the range that we were publishing right now is 34 to 48 billion dollars.
48. Now, of that 48 billion, how much is property damage in the Northeast?
About half of that, I would say. So the majority of the damage is property, right? The majority of the number is property damage, and then within that number, most of that is now from the Northeast.
So,
I'd say about,
okay, so let's just round. You're saying 50 billion for the total cost. That's property damage and lost economic output, but 25 billion or so is property damage in the Northeast.
More or less. That's the high end of the range, but that's right.
Yeah, I bet that number is going to rise. It's going to rise. Yeah, I don't believe that number. Sorry, but we'll come back to how you do that calculation. I just got a call from my sister, whose son lives in Philly, and he had a car in a lot. The family car was in the lot, and he was for some reason. Oh, they have a home down in Philly, so he was staying down in Philly. The car was completely lost, flooded out in this lot in the middle of downtown Philadelphia. Hard to imagine that would be the case. So I don't know. That just doesn't feel right. But anyway, we'll come back to that. You can defend your numbers. But talking about numbers, that jobs number, what the heck, Ryan? What's going on? Tell the listener, to summarize, what were the numbers and your interpretation?
All right, well, I do have to give you and Dante credit. ADP this month was very close. It was well below the consensus. So the consensus was for roughly 725,000 net gain in non-farm employment. It came in closer to 230,000. I'm not too concerned. We knew job growth was going to slow. We were looking for 500,000, which was at the very low end of the consensus range. There's a lot of things in August. You had the surge in COVID cases, and you saw that in leisure and hospitality, which created no new jobs in August. And you also have this August effect. Death, taxes, and a below consensus August employment number are the only things guaranteed in life. And it came to fruition again. Unemployment rate fell to 5.2%. Labor force participation rate was unchanged. So all in all, it was a soft number or a soft report, but as we've talked about, the job numbers are going to bounce around. They're going to be here and there. Over the last 3 months, we're still creating more than 700,000 jobs on average, and that's a very strong number.
Yeah, yeah. So 235, and you are ADP. You're right. Just to let the listener in on this, ADP is a human resource company. We have a partnership with them. We take their data, which they provide to us for 23 million employees that they process payrolls for, and we construct an estimate of what we think the BLS number is going to be for the private sector. It doesn't include government. And we came in at what? We came in at, I can't remember, 350 or something like that.
Yeah, right around there. Yeah.
And that's a little on the high, still on the high side compared to what actually happened. Yeah. And your estimate was also closer than consensus for sure. You were at 500K, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, we're among the lowest in the consensus range. I mean, it still came in a lot weaker than I thought. The big surprise to me was leisure and hospitality. I thought COVID would hurt, but I didn't think it was going to have that significant of an impact. I mean, when you look at the industry detail, all the industries that are very sensitive to social distancing or COVID cases really, really underperformed in August. So I think, COVID is made it a big mark on August job growth.
Yeah, I think the Delta variant was all over the report. I mean,
yeah, no, I agree.
Restaurants, employment at restaurants, I think that was down during the month, and leisure and hospitality in aggregate, which includes restaurants, was flat, and that sector had been adding several 100,000 jobs per month as it kind of normalizes coming out of the pandemic. That feels very much related to Delta. Also, the global supply chain disruptions created by Delta overseas, it feels like that's in the report too, right? Because there was a big decline in employment at motor vehicle dealerships, and that may be because they just can't sell cars because there aren't any cars to sell.
Yeah, auto inventories, new car inventories are near historic lows, and you can see it in the monthly vehicle sale numbers that we gotten. This thing's just tanking like a rock. It's falling like a rock. It's down to 13 million annualized units. That's low, and it's not that consumers don't have the cash or can afford cars. It's that there's just not enough cars out there to buy, and that's coming at the expense of sales.
Yeah, that's another good statistic that came out yesterday. 13 million, a little over 13 million vehicles sold in the month of August, annualized. That's just for context, kind of a typical sales level is about 17 million units annualized, and 13 million that's back close. It's not as bad as it was in the teeth of the pandemic recession, but it's down a lot. Yeah,
and
so
that number crushed our high frequency GDP model. So this is a model that we have it's really like a bean counting approach. It takes all the source data that the Bureau of Economic Analysis uses to calculate quarterly GDP, and we run it every day. And when you get new source data, this thing can move a little bit here and there. It went from 5.3% at an annualized rate down to 3.9% because of vehicle sales. It really hit consumer spending in the third quarter.
Yeah, before we move on to Delta more broadly and what's going on with the economy, but clearly jobs numbers suggest that Delta is doing real damage to the economy, the economic recovery. And I want to talk a bit more about, under what scenarios could it undermine the recovery, but we'll come back to that in a second. I just want to ask you a bit about that comment you made about August employment gains always coming in on the soft side. Do you want to explain that a little bit? And what's the intuition or what's the logic behind why August?
So the primary reason is that the response rate to the survey that the Bureau of Labor Statistics sends out to establishments always comes in low. So when you get a low response rate, typically you're going to see a low initial print a below consensus number. And then as they get more and more responses, you're going to see an upward revision. So this number is disappointing, 230, but I would suspect by the time we get the second and the third revision, it's going to be higher. So on average, now this is pre-pandemic, the average revision between the first and the final estimate of August employment is positive 70,000. So maybe the pandemic, juices that a little bit, but when it's all said and done, 230 is going to be the low end of the estimate.
So you're saying if history's any guide, it may end up after revisions being 300K, not 230K.
Yeah, and I mean, recently we've been seeing a lot larger revisions. I mean, last month, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like 964,000.
Yeah.
Now it's 1.05 million. So, I mean, we're getting some big upward revisions. So, in the end, I don't think it's going to be as glaring of a disappointment. Still going to be a disappointment, but it's not going to be as bad as it looks right now.
Right. I mean, in our forecast, our outlook, we have average monthly job growth over the next 12, more like 18 months of about 500K. So that assumes some months are going to be like last month when we got over 1 million, and some months like this month when we got 250K, on average 500K. You still feel pretty comfortable with that?
Yeah, on average, yeah. I think September, and we'll get to this when we talk about Hurricane Ida, but odds are that's going to affect the September numbers. So we're going to see another month where a little mediocre job growth, and then I think we pick back up when we're on the other side of the Delta variant and the rebuilding begins to commence.
Okay. Hey, Adam, let me bring you in on the conversation. Anything you're observing around the job market regionally? Any insights? I mean, are you noticing any weakness in, for example, the Southeast Florida, where the Delta is more of an issue? Are you observing any of that?
We are, yeah. So I think obviously we don't have the August numbers, and we won't for a few weeks. But what some of the real-time data seem to be showing, right? This is data from OpenTable on seated diner reservations, some Google mobility data on retail and recreation, and the amount of time that people are spending in those types of establishments. You've seen that fall off pretty noticeably in a number of southeastern states. So Florida, although weirdly in the last week, the OpenTable has shot up for Florida. So actually our back to normal index has gone way up there. But that kind of parenthetical aside, we've actually seen Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, a number of states in the Southeast really starting to fall off in the real-time data. There's some traces of evidence of that even in the July numbers that where the beginnings of the Delta surge were happening, that those states were weakening. So there's definitely a relationship there that we're observing.
Okay. Ryan, I'm guessing, we typically play a game with the statistics where we spout out a statistic that we think is
I got a good one.
Let the other guys guess. Do you have a good one that's related to the jobs numbers? Otherwise, I don't want to.
Here's your hint. You don't want it?
Well, unless it's apropos. I don't want.
It's related to the jobs number, and it's related to the Delta variant. This is a big clue.
Okay.
Ready?
Fire away. Adam, you ready?
I'm ready.
5.6 million.
Okay, 5.6 million. Is that number of long-term unemployed?
No.
You were about to say that could be.
Yeah, I know. Then I stopped myself because I don't want to give you any
it could be pretty close to that number.
Yeah, it could be. It was not the number I'm thinking of.
It's not the number you're thinking of. 5.6 million. And it's also related to the Delta variant, you said.
Correct.
Job market, Delta variant. Adam, any idea?
Man,
in the Delta variant.
I'm trying to think if it's something to do with cases or vaccinations or something along those lines.
No, it's actually written up in the labor market release.
Oh, the BLS. Oh, I thought I read it. I didn't. It's 5.6 million.
You got to read these things carefully.
I know. You're down into the bowels of these reports.
Yeah, look at the footnotes.
Yeah, you want to give us one more hint, or you'll give it away probably at that point?
We've talked about it before on the podcast.
We have. Okay, 5.6 million. I don't know. Fire away. Right. What is it?
It's a long-term unemployed.
That's what I said. You're not paying attention.
Right. Yeah.
What are you trying to take my? Yeah.
5.6 million. It's up from 5.2 million in July. And it's the number of people that were unable to work because of COVID, either shut down their employer or temporarily closed.
Okay, that is a really good statistic to watch. So 400K increase in the
Mhm.
month, and it had been steadily declining. Has it since back last spring? Has it risen at all? It's always been pretty
I don't
much
think so. I
going
think it's been
south.
steadily declining. Yeah.
Okay, well
So
that's
the,
interesting. That's
yep.
very
So I
interesting.
thought that number kind of, as soon as I saw that, I was like, this report, this weakness.
This is COVID.
August effect, small. It's all COVID.
Yeah, right. Okay. Adam, I'm guessing you have a statistic you want to throw in as well, right? That you want us to guess. Is it related to the job market?
I had one. I think it's pretty obvious now, but I'm going to give you a little twist on this. I'm going to give you.
But I don't want to hear it unless it's related to the job market.
It's related. Well, I have one for later too, but I'll save that. I have a natural disaster one,
Okay.
but that's later. I can give you a job market
Okay,
one.
fair enough. Go ahead.
All right. I'm going to give you two, and this is sort of related to what we were just talking about. So this might be the old underhand softball.
Well, don't press your luck here. I mean, come on, give us one, and let's see if it's any good, and then we'll go on to the two.
Well, they're related, but okay.
Yeah, okay.
Negative 0.26%. Actually, negative 0.27%.
Now we're going out 2 decimal places.
And you're saying
it's from the jobs report too.
It's in the jobs report today.
Yes. Yeah, and it's something that we're related to what we're talking about. The other number that is sort of a related number to that is 1.7%, 1.698%. They are two related metrics.
It can't be anything with wages. Wages shot up in.
Yeah, no, it's not wage growth. And by the way, that wage growth number, that's all mixed, right?
Correct. Yeah, I ignore that number.
We saw a big increase in wage growth in the month, and that's because we saw a lot of weakness in retail, leisure, hospitality, which are low-paying occupations, jobs, and that because this measure doesn't control for mix, we saw this big increase. So it's misleading. It's not that wage growth is weak. It's held up really well, done pretty well, but this number overstates the case and it's to a significant degree. So it's not that. But
is it hours? I thought hours were.
No, it's related. It's an employment number.
Oh, it's not in the report.
It's a change in employment. It's in.
What's that? It's in the report.
It's in the report.
Oh, he's like picked out one sector that was down 270,000 jobs.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
career employment. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wait a second though. Okay. Wait. 270,000. Okay. What? It's got to be pretty. That's a big.
270,000. No, it was negative 0.27%.
Oh, percent.
He's going.
It's a month. It's two month-to-month changes that are in the jobs reports. All right. One is negative 0.27%. One is 1.69, 1.7%. They're two related industries.
Oh.
That we've already kind of been talking about here.
Restaurants?
So, yeah. One is restaurants.
Yeah. Is the other one positive 1.7?
The other one's positive 1.7.
Professional and business services?
No, it's the other. I can just tell you.
Go ahead.
You're torturing
us. So we're talking about accommodations in restaurants was negative 0.27, right? That's the element of the jobs report of leisure hospitality. That's more about people traveling, going out to eat. The other one is NAICS code 71, the related NAICS code, the other industry, right? That is people going to games and movies, right?
Wait a second. This is to the top.
Is it too late to revoke his invitation?
I know. I'm thinking that. And he said he had another statistic.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
All right. Well, you stole my thunder a little bit here. I probably went a little too deep, but
a little.
All right. The point that I'm trying to make here.
What's the point?
Is that accommodations, food services, restaurants, hotels, they're down. I think that reflects the lack of consumer confidence, concern over Delta.
That reflects Delta.
Right.
Okay. All
right. I'm getting there.
Okay.
NAICS 71, the other piece of this, right? That would be things like concerts and ball games and movies and events. That's still going up. And what I think is striking in some of the data here is that you're still seeing a lot of reopening momentum taking place, right? And so one of the things I'm looking at, I keep looking to see if New York City, for example, is going to change its plans about reopening Broadway next month, or actually this month now, in light of Delta. And they're not, right? It seems like businesses, local governments, everyone's kind of plowing forward, but consumers themselves are spooked by Delta. And I think that's what's really driving some of these numbers. So I thought that was interesting.
I guess that's sort of that's interesting. Okay, I'll give you that the recreational activities continue to advance in higher jobs, but it doesn't square with loss of jobs at restaurants and flat overall leisure hospitality, right? I mean, so that suggests that businesses are pulling back, right? That the reopening isn't proceeding like it certainly was just a month or two ago because of Delta.
Well, the momentum is slipping, it's decelerating, but the degree to which it's decelerating is really different, right? So I think in restaurants and in hotels, you're seeing a really sharp deceleration. I think demand has dropped really noticeably, but I think for events, for shows, for games, et cetera, you're still seeing demand looking pretty healthy for that, relatively speaking.
Yeah. Maybe, I mean, I had thought, all right, maybe this was more a hope than a thought, that, businesses would look through Delta. That, yeah, right, Delta is definitely causing consumers to be more cautious, pull back a little bit, travel a little bit less, go to restaurants less. But they're going to look through that and continue to hire because they know that they've got 10 million open job positions and that Delta is going to go away at some point, and they're going to be back right at trying to hire people. And if they kind of stop the train right now, they're going to have more difficulty a month or two or three from now starting the train back up again. That's what I had hoped for.
I think that's still true.
You do?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I agree. I don't think they're going to slow down their hiring. I think the weakness in
No, but they
August
are, right? Aren't they? Didn't they do that in the month? Or you're saying that's overstated because of
it's
measurement
overstated.
issue?
It's overstated. It's just like, I mean, really, we got to, look through the ups and downs in August and September because there's going to be these idiosyncratic events. Delta, next month's a hurricane, and it's going to look like businesses are pulling back on hiring, but they're not unless Delta prevents people from coming back into the labor force. They have 10 million jobs, but they need people to fill these. And the Delta variant, if it causes schools to shut down, or if people are just too nervous to go back into the labor force, worried about getting a family member sick, then that's really going to be what drives the weakness in hiring. It's not a demand issue; it's a supply.
Okay, and maybe that is, Adam. Just to be fair, I guess what you're suggesting is because these recreational activities, these industries that are like Broadway or ball games or concerts, that they're continuing to add to payrolls, which they did in the month of August, suggests that's consistent with what I just said. That businesses are kind of looking through this to a significant degree. That's what you're suggesting.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting.
You're looking on the upside here. You're looking on the bright side.
I think, right, businesses are looking through it, and I think the supply of leisure is still out there, right? And sort of to Ryan's point, that if businesses are continuing to look through, and if things are still kind of proceeding, then yeah, there's not too much to worry about in the months ahead. I don't think, if Delta doesn't sort of continue to intensify or get significantly worse.
Okay. Hey, one other question I had before we talk a little bit more about Delta is this debate around the supply of labor. I guess September was supposed to be a pretty big month for people coming back to work. Schools reopened, in-person learning, and that had been, at least in my view, probably the most significant constraint on people coming back to work. In the UI benefits all kind of roll, the emergency UI benefits, unemployment insurance benefits rolling off, the supplemental unemployment insurance benefit, that goes away in, I think, almost all states. Maybe some states have kept it. They're able to if they want to. In the pandemic, unemployment insurance for gig workers, contract workers, that came off. Anything in the data that would suggest more labor supply coming into the economy because of these things? Anything in the numbers?
Not in August. And
Not in August.
Adam can speak more about the regional, but all three of us dug through that report, and I couldn't find any evidence that states that ended UI benefits early in June and July saw a big increase in either labor force or job growth. I think the UI is at the bottom of the list of reasons why people aren't re-entering the labor force.
Yeah, if anything, those states went backwards in July, I think, because, I mean, one, many of those states are states where Delta's surging, and that just matters a whole lot more than cutting off benefits. And I think also, right, if we're not seeing much upward pressure on labor force participation or people re-entering the labor force, what you're seeing in the other direction is that there are some people who were receiving benefits who are now not. So, incomes are going down. And so, right, that's a net negative for the economy. And I think both of those effects, I think we're seeing sort of the reverse of what maybe some of the states that implemented those policies were hoping.
Yeah, I guess bottom line, the participation rate, the labor force participation rate held steady at 61.7%. So, and that's really not changed very much in recent months. And so it doesn't suggest that labor's coming back in a significant way yet. They're not leaving, but they're not coming in a significant way. And I suppose it's just to point out, there's no going back, I don't think, to the 63% plus participation rate that existed pre-pandemic, because you've got a lot of boomers, baby boomers, people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s that left the workforce during the pandemic. It doesn't feel like they're coming back, right? I mean, they're retired.
Yeah, I would agree. And we're
Stock prices are up, housing values are up.
Exactly.
Their nest egg is pretty large. They're, out of here. Okay. I mean, we have in our forecast participation rising about a point from here over the next 12, 18 months, but there's no going back to where we were. Yeah. Okay. Hey, let's just to kind of round things out on Delta, because that clearly is top of mind here. And I think my read of what you guys are saying is, okay, it's doing some damage, but it's not going to derail the recovery by any stretch. And hopefully the infections start to wind down a bit. Maybe hopefully the UK, their experience where Delta has petered out is a good case study for our future. Then we kick back into gear and get some bigger job numbers down the road. So no big deal. Let me ask this: under what circumstances does it become a big deal? I mean, what would you be looking for to gauge whether you're either one, you're not getting the severity of the virus, and more importantly, I guess the fallout on the economy, the impact on the economy. So, what kinds of things are you looking at to try to gauge that?
Well, I'll give you mine, and then I'll let Adam.
Yeah.
School closures. So I'm keeping a very close tab on the number of schools that are closing down, because a lot of schools have protocols in place. I mean, just a few days before my son's elementary school opened up, they sent home a letter saying, "All right, here's the criteria. If case counts hit this, then it's mask, social distancing, no lunch." So they have all these procedures, and I think if schools start to shut down and go back virtual, then that's going to be a big hit to the labor supply, and that's going to delay when we start to see an increase in job growth, because the demand is still going to be there. We're still going to have 10 million job openings. It's the labor supply that's going to take a long time to come back if we get this surge in school closures.
Yeah, I think I got this right, but I heard that 2 school districts in Florida went back to online, that they closed because of increasing infections. Yep. That can't be a good sign.
No, it's not.
I think it was their first week. They didn't even get out of the first week.
Right, and of course, kids under 12 haven't been vaccinated, so the high potential of getting sick. Yeah. Adam, what about you? What are you looking at?
I'd agree that school closures are top of mind here. I mean, the other thing I think is just important to keep an eye on is the degree to which there are more breakthrough infections. And the thing that could be the game changer to me is if breakthrough infections keep rising or we start to see breakthrough hospitalizations or deaths. I mean, both because obviously that signals that our best defense here has been compromised, but also because this is more of a regional shock, I think, at the moment still. It's plowing through states with high unvaccinated rates. If it starts to really affect states in the Northeast and the West Coast where vaccination rates are high, those are the states that have really been aggressive about closing back up again. And so that, I think, is a recipe for a broader, potentially national kind of setback.
I'll have to say, the impact, I think, has been broader than just those regions. I mean, it's affected people's thinking. I mean, you can see it in the consumer sentiment measures, the Conference Board survey of sentiment, which is very labor market oriented, which is the labor market's been very strong, that really tanked in August.
Mm-hmm.
And that came after the University of Michigan survey, which is more, that's tied more to financial conditions like the stock market. And that tanked, that's tanked both. So this is clearly weighing on people's thinking, and it's certainly on mine. I mean, maybe I'm projecting. I mean, again, this is more a thought, more a hope than a thought. But I thought when the vaccines came out a few months ago that done and dusted, as they would say on Peloton. This is over, or at least not a big deal going forward. But the Delta has made it very clear that this thing is not over and can have serious impacts, and it's having an impact on me. Like, I'm now much more reluctant. I just canceled my trip to Europe for early October because, in part, they're not back to work either, so it's hard to have meetings. But the EU, the European Union, just made it more difficult to travel to the EU for Americans, and I'm just nervous about traveling with so many cases out there and breakthrough infections. Vaccines not insulating people from the virus. So it feels like this is having a really dampening effect on the collective psyche, and more of an impact than I had expected. And so, if infections continue to rise here, and I agree with you, Adam, if you see more breakthrough infections, the vaccines just don't insulate people as well as we thought from this. This is going to do more damage. It's going to be more of a problem. We're already going to have to we've already marked down our forecast, right? I mean, as you pointed out, Brian, Q3 GDP is tracking 3.9%. My guess is that's not the end of it. We're going to see some further markdowns.
Because we incorporate only one piece of evidence or data for August, and that's vehicle sales. So we have a lot more August data to come in, and this is when cases are surging. So I think Q3 GDP is shaping up to be much weaker.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other thing is you mentioned to me about the GDP tracking. You were at 3.9%, but a big chunk of that is just simply inventories, right? That we had this huge inventory decline because producers couldn't produce enough to meet the demand. And now there's going to be less of an inventory drawdown, or maybe a little bit of an inventory accumulation. I'm not sure which. And that swing means that GDP, a big chunk of the GDP growth is nothing but inventory.
That's a great point. So if you strip out inventories, GDP is tracking less than 1%. So, excluding inventories, we're crawling now.
Yeah, that's disconcerting. We got to get to the other side of this Delta variant pretty quickly here, I think. Otherwise, it's going to really be more of an issue. Okay, anything else on Delta we should be considering, thinking about, wondering? I mean, I did mention what's going on overseas. I think we can't discount the importance of what it means. I mean, did I mention the Chinese port shutting down? Did I mention that on the podcast? I can't remember.
We talked about it before.
Yeah, well, did we? Okay, it's an anecdote, but I think it's representative. I mean, China shut down, I think they've reopened it more recently, but they did shut down a terminal in a major seaport because of COVID, because of Delta. And that, obviously disrupted, all the shipping from China into the rest of the world, including the U.S. for goods for the Christmas buying season. In a number of chip plants in Southeast Asia, which are key to the global supply chain, they've shut down because of just people are too sick to work. And that's now rippling through the global auto industry, and increasing number of auto companies are shutting down, which means that's going to undermine sales as well. So the Delta is not only about what it is doing to the collective psyche here in the U.S., not only about, what it's doing in the parts of the country where vaccinations are light and infections are rising, but it's also what's going on globally. It's an issue. So yeah, this is, I think, more of a deal than I had hoped or thought it would be just a few weeks ago. Okay, all right, let's move on. Another thing to worry about: hurricanes. Gee whiz! If it's not one thing, it's another. Come on, please, cut us a break. By the way, in the grand scheme, I know I'm pontificating a little bit here, but I just thought I'd point this out. When you think about it, we've been nailed we, meaning the collective we, have been nailed by some pretty major shocks in recent decades. Right? I mean, 9/11, that was a pretty massive shock that, we're still paying for. You can see it on TV screens as we pull away from Afghanistan. I mean, the cost of that thing has been enormous. And then we had the financial shock, the subprime mortgage crisis. That was 2008, 2009.
Don't forget
Then we
about
had this,
Katrina,
I forgot about
2005.
Katrina. That was 2005. And by the way, we're gonna come back to that in just a second. And then now this pandemic, which is enormously costly. So it's like, cut us a break, please. And then they throw us the hurricane at us. So, real, set of challenges for us economically.
It's all my fault.
It's your
All
fault.
these
Why?
Because I joined Moody's, or well, still, it was economy.com at the time, in 2005, in July. So all these, then we had we had Hurricane Katrina, and then we had the Great Financial Crisis. All of this has occurred since I became a business economist.
That is interesting. I'm sure there's causation there, not correlation.
There's definitely.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I'm going to watch you. We're going to call it the sweet disaster index or something.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hey, Adam, when did you join? Did you join before Ryan? Were you on
No,
board?
no, I actually joined right after Sandy. So we all benchmark our time by what natural disaster
Oh,
hit.
that's funny.
So,
That's very funny.
yeah, so 2012.
Okay. Hurricane Ida, give us the lowdown, Adam, on that one. How big a deal is this going to be in terms of the economic data and statistics?
All right. So, well, first of all, clearly a bigger deal. You think it's a bigger deal than I do, given.
Oh, yes, exactly.
So whatever I say, just double it or whatever.
My anecdotes say it's going to be bigger. That's all I'm saying.
So from a macroeconomic perspective, it's not a huge deal. That generally is the case with hurricanes. I think there's one exception, and that's Katrina. And even Katrina, I don't think was a national shock. That was a long-term regional shock. And the way most of these others are they're shocks that last maybe a month or two, but generally you get rebuilding, you get reopening of businesses, and very little evidence of changes in migration patterns or anything along those lines in the longer term coming out of these disasters. So I don't think this is a huge deal in terms of the business cycle or where things are going. But having said that, it's a big deal for Louisiana, certainly in the near term. I think that's a real concern and really, I think, highlights some long-term risk in the Northeast around climate change in general. I think this is a really kind of harsh reminder of that. And then there's potentially a little bit of an impact on gasoline prices and on the energy market, although it does seem like, unlike Harvey and Katrina, that there wasn't a lot of damage to the refineries and to the pipelines themselves. I think they reopened pretty quickly. So that's, I think, one of the more common channels by which hurricanes can have a pretty significant widespread macroeconomic impact. And I don't think we're going to see that here.
Okay. So just to summarize, in my kind of simplistic way of thinking of things, there's three key channels through which a storm like this can impact the economy. One is the obvious physical damage to property, to physical public infrastructure, that kind of thing. Which in this case, that's where I was arguing it may end up being larger than our current estimate. Second is the economic disruption, lost power, which disrupts businesses. People can't get to work, which is obviously the case in the Northeast because of your kids not going to school would be an example of that. And just lost economic activity. And then the third channel is through the energy markets, because these storms blow through the Gulf, a lot of energy production, a lot of refinery activity along the coast that gets disrupted. That certainly happened in past storms. That causes oil prices, natural gas prices, and gasoline, electricity prices all rise. And of course, that sucks the energy out of the economy because if you have to pay more to fill your gas tank, you have less to spend on everything else. That's kind of the frame, right?
I think that's right. I think maybe number 3 there, we could think of it more broadly as just supply chain disruptions, but I think the most frequent supply chain disruption is to energy markets.
Yeah, good point. Because there was, which storm was it that kind of destroyed the port of New Orleans and caused all kinds of havoc with
Katrina?
Was that Katrina?
Yeah.
Yeah, Katrina.
And there was a lot of concern that we're going to see gas prices rise like we did after Katrina. But what people forget, I think, is Katrina hit August 29th, 2005. A week later, Rita came through, almost a similar path, and that hit the Gulf Coast as well. So these oil rigs, gasoline refineries were shut down for a longer period of time. They're already getting back up and running after Ida. So I don't think we're going to see a big surge in gas prices.
Yeah, it feels like gas prices. I mean, at last I looked, gasoline prices already come back in, didn't they? I don't think they've.
They're going to go back up. Gasoline futures rose yesterday, and they usually lead retail gasoline prices by 1 to 2 weeks. So
is that related to Ida or something else?
It's related to Ida.
Oh, it is. Okay. Okay. So bottom line, Ida, at most right now, you're estimating that the property damage plus the lost economic activity, 50 billion all in. That includes what happened to Louisiana. That's what's happened to the Northeast. That's your current estimate.
That's the current estimate. Now, the one thing I'll say kind of in response to what you were saying earlier, a number, by the way, that you signed off on, not to point fingers here. But
No. Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Well, I should say this, Adam, before you say anything more. You're like a SWAT team for natural disasters. Every time there is a natural disaster, and as you pointed out, there has been many and going to be many more because of climate change. You're on the case and you are trying to figure out what is the economic liability, the cost of all of this. So you do that for hurricanes, you do that for flooding, you do that for wildfires, earthquakes, whatever it is. So you are a natural disaster guru. So you know what you're doing. That's why I don't question it. I question it, but I sign off on it. Let's put it that way.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm like the Grim Reaper. If you see me, something terrible either has happened or is about to happen. So I think generally, I think you're right. Like, I'm thinking 50 million at the moment. Now, what's a little bit squishy with these numbers?
50 billion.
Right, sort of the top end. But to your point, I think it's very difficult to get a handle. So the Louisiana part of this, I think it was easier to get a handle on property damage and on lost output. It's a relatively small geography that was hit the hardest. It was clear the extent of the damage in some of the coastal areas of Louisiana. New Orleans actually wasn't hit that hard comparatively. The power outages are a big deal. But the physical damage was much more pronounced if you go kind of a little bit south of New Orleans and to the coastal areas. The tricky thing about the Northeast is, right, you just have such a vast swath of territory and just tons of people and housing density, population density. So the vulnerable area, just the amount of value at risk from a storm like this is off the charts. But what's a little bit less clear, and I think we'll learn more, these numbers always evolve over the course of probably a week or so, is to see just what is the extent of the damage. I think we've all seen really jarring images. Basically, we've seen in Louisiana, in New Orleans, it was pretty clear that it was a relatively small footprint. We knew that the counties that were hit hardest, we knew that there was kind of utter devastation in some of these counties. And so we know that if we look at the property values and we look at the housing stock in those areas, we have a pretty good idea of what the value at risk there is and to what degree house prices and other aspects of sort of that economy value was lost. In the Northeast, it's a little bit more complicated because you have such high population density, such high housing density, much higher house prices and property values in the area that was hit in the Northeast than in Louisiana. So it means that there's a ton of value at risk. So if we're thinking kind of a worst case scenario here as this is passing through, and we think that 5 to 10% of homes suffered significant damage or something like that, that is unbelievably costly. I think what we need to still get a handle on, we're just starting to see it now, is how just how widespread the damage was. We know that there's again, this kind of broad geography where there was damage. What's less clear to me is if you're going kind of through, my suspicion is as you're going kind of county to county, kind of through the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area, there's some areas of utter devastation, but most areas kind of came through okay. And so because of that, I've kind of discounted the number a little bit and assumed that, we're looking at maybe 1 to 2% of the housing stock, for example, that suffered really significant damage. But if I'm underestimating there, that we'll need to revise that number higher.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I think one of the things that made Katrina, and you may mention this already, I'll just repeat it, that so devastating. I mean, I think the cost in today's dollars of Katrina were closer to 200 billion, just for context. So we're talking Ida 50 billion, Sandy maybe 100 billion, Katrina 200 billion, big deal. Was that it dislocated a big chunk of the population. A large number of folks from New Orleans actually left. They literally moved to Houston and other parts of the country. And you can see it in the data. I mean, if you look at employment or population in New Orleans, you can quickly see when Katrina hit. It was an inflection point. But we don't see that, do we, in other cases? Are there any other cases? And I know you've done some work looking at the fires in California and the impact on people's location decision where they're going to live, and you haven't seen any. You've not noticed any impact after controlling for all kinds of stuff. Do I have that right?
That's right. And interesting. I should have gone with the other number. My other number was going to be the number of people that left New Orleans in the aftermath of Katrina.
What was it?
But a little less obscure than NAICS Code 71. So that was about 350,000 people that left. About 1 in 3 residents of New Orleans left between mid-2005 and mid-2006. And many of them never came back. It's still 100,000 residents in the hole from where it was beforehand.
Adam's point about people not returning to New Orleans also gets back to, you got hit by 2 hurricanes in roughly 2 weeks, and the levees broke during Katrina and flooded New Orleans, so people really couldn't go back. This time around, fortunately, the levees held, and we avoided a repeat of what happened after Katrina.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, just as an interlude before we move on, I just want to give you play a little bit of the statistics game, just because it'll break it up a little bit. And I don't know if I asked this before, but we purchased this firm, Moody's purchased this firm called 427. 427 is a Berkeley-based group that tracks climate related weather events and rates the risk of a climate event by property. So I could give them my address, and they could come back. They'll come back and say, okay, you're at high risk of flood, low risk of earthquakes. Your overall risk is this. Based on that data, and here's the question, and this goes to combining regional with natural disasters. Which metropolitan area in the country do you think is at most risk from climate events? Climate-related events.
That would have been my guess.
Everyone says Miami,
but it's not. I feel like I've heard this before. Yeah.
You have heard this before?
I can't remember what it is though, so it'll be new to me again. But I think I have heard that it's not Miami.
No, it's in Florida.
It's in Florida.
And the only reason I remember this is because this is my hint to you. My wife is from this metropolitan area. Not that that's going to help you at all, but.
And it's not where you have your vacation home.
It's not Vero Beach. No.
Okay.
No.
Daytona Beach, Florida. Isn't that interesting? Daytona Beach, Florida. That's of all 4. How many metropolitan areas are there in the country right now?
About 400, 402.
402.
Well, including divisions, but yeah, 402.
Over 402 areas. Daytona is the most at risk of natural events. Okay, here's another question for you. Another quiz. What was the total amount of economic loss, property damage, and lost economic activity in 2005? Katrina is a couple $100 billion. So
you're getting this number? Is this The number you're getting from the BEA?
This is from a reinsurer, Aon.
Oh, okay.
Aon, obviously, they're very focused on this as an issue because they got to pay out claims. So they've come up with some pretty good estimates. Just, roughly speaking, what do you think it's?
125 billion.
200 billion was Katrina, so it has to be more than that, right? So
for all of
You're saying since
2005.
2005?
No, just 2005.
Just-
2005. Just to give you a sense of it. This is the record a year in terms of damage. 2005 included Katrina. Katrina was 200 billion. I'll put you out of your misery. 365 billion. 365 billion. That's in today's dollars in 2021 dollars. Yeah. Here's another statistic for you. Again, based on the Aon, this is a reinsurer calculation. If you go back into the 80s, on average, typical year, now obviously this goes up and down year by year, but on average, the damage from climatological and meteorological events was about 25 billion per annum, right? In the last few years, last 5 years, again, it goes up and down all around. It's $125 billion in today's dollars. So that's a fivefold increase. GDP over that same period has increased threefold. So that gives you a sense of things. So, to your point, Adam, I think we need to get prepared for more events, more costly events going forward. Particularly if it gets into the Northeast, where there's a lot of densely populated with a lot of highly valued property and economic activity. That's going to be a significant problem for us going forward. Okay,
I think one thing to quickly point out, Adam's throwing around big numbers like 50 billion lost property. That doesn't get counted in GDP. What will be counted is the rebuilding. So, you hear, well, we have GDP tracking 3.9%, but now we're losing $50 billion, from the storm. That's not going to impact GDP.
Yeah, and that brings up another point. This whole kind of thinking that maybe natural disasters are a good thing because you have a bad day, but then you get all this money and you start rebuilding and it generates all this economic activity. And that's a good thing. So maybe this is a good thing. I think that's called the broken window fallacy. Is that right? Do I have that right? Yeah.
I think it's the other way around. The broken window fallacy says, it was from that French economist that said, if you go around breaking windows, you're not creating economic welfare, you're just creating economic activity. And that's why it's really important to make a distinction between economic activity, so rebuilding homes, bridges, roads, and economic welfare. Those in Louisiana that were hurt by Hurricane Ida, their economic welfare is damaged, but it will recoup, as we've seen after Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, all hurricanes. Mostly, those economies are made whole through insurance payouts or federal aid.
Yeah, that's the fallacy. It's fallacious thinking.
Yes.
That's not, it's a broken window kind of argument, but there's the broken window fallacies that's kind of dumb. That's not right.
It always comes up when we have natural disasters.
Yeah. So what happens, just to make it clear to everybody, you have all this damage, then insurance money comes in many cases, government aid at federal, state, local. So you get all this money to rebuild, and that generates a lot of jobs and economic activity. And that does show up, as you pointed out, in GDP and jobs and incomes GDP. And so that you see this kind of pop in growth. And people say, oh, well, that's a good thing, right? So what's the problem with the natural disaster? The way I think about that, though, the fallacy is kind of an income balance sheet argument. So that on an income side of the economy, you initially get hurt because you lose economic activity. The property damage is not relevant here, but you lose in the income statement, but you lose the economic activity in the day 2, 3, week 2, 3 that everyone can't get to work and power's out. You get the money in, that generates economic activity, and and you get that pop to growth. But at the end of that, your income statement is kind of back to where it was, down, up, and back to where it was. And in terms of but in terms of your balance sheet, that, the assets that this economy has, I just suffered a huge loss, from the physical damage. And, maybe I can get back to where I was with a little bit of luck if I got a lot of insurance money coming in, if I got a lot of government aid coming in. But there's definitely no guarantee that's going to happen, that you're going to be made whole by, all the sources of support that may come in, and that you're actually, at the end of the day, diminished by the natural disaster. Your economy that has a lower capital stock, lower public infrastructure is diminished, your private infrastructure is diminished, and you have less productive capability going forward. And it could actually affect your long-term growth rates if it's probably not because it's too small, but on the margin, that kind of impact. That's kind of is that how you think about it?
Yeah, and the one thing I would add is that, this is why rebuilding is really important, in the sense that you got to do it the right way. And New Orleans did it the right way after Katrina. You're going to replace old bridges, old roads with new bridges, new roads. But they invested in the levees, and that really paid dividends for Hurricane Ida. They didn't break like they did in Katrina. So if you rebuild correctly, invest in improving the capital stock, then the long-term economic welfare could be a little bit better than it was before the hurricane.
Yeah, and I think one other kind of regularity I've noticed, this is just me eyeballing things. I'm curious whether this is consistent with what you've studied or your intuition. If you go back 50, 75 years ago, when you had a natural disaster, the amount of insurance money and government aid that came in fell well short of the actual physical damage that the economy suffered. But in recent years and decades, let's say over the last 3-4 decades, the amount of insurance money and government aid that comes in is almost equal to the amount of physical damage. And actually, the government response is calibrated to account for the insurance. So if you're in an area where there's not a lot of insurance, New Orleans be a good case in point, you get more government aid. If you get a lot of insurance, like Northeast would be a good case in point because of all the wealthy households and businesses, you get less government aid. But net, the amount of funding that's coming in is roughly equal to the damage. Is that, in your mind's eye, is that consistent with what you've observed and think?
I think so. I think we've seen generally the federal government sparing little expense in some of these disasters, and being very generous with aid towards areas that are hit. I think there have been times where I think it still has fallen short. I think if we look back to Hurricane Maria a few years ago, for example, in Puerto Rico, it fell very short there. There are times, I think it depends a little bit on the disaster, on the geography of the disaster too. To your point, Sandy, aid was not as great because there was a wealthier population, higher levels of insurance. Maybe the need wasn't as great. I think the total aid still fell a bit short. So I think there are times, it depends a bit on the storm, but I think by and large, I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the one other point I wanted to make about this particular storm, Ida, in any storm we suffer here in the near term, is that the rebuilding might be more prolonged and painful. And that's because there's no people to build, and we have these very severe supply chain disruptions globally, and we can't get, building materials, right? You can't get everything from lumber to gypsum to concrete to steel to you name it. People are having trouble getting it. So this is particularly inopportune. You can't, and all those cars that are getting destroyed, that flooded out. I mean, good luck. It's going to be pretty difficult, to find a new car at this point. So that's going to make this one a little bit more the recovery from Ida, I think, longer and more painful. It's just given the circumstances that we're in right now. Okay. Anything else we should be discussing here? I mean, Adam, you made a good point about you're going to be very busy going forward. It feels like that, because of climate change, we're going to have more events, more serious events. I will say, and I don't know if I've talked to you about this, but we're looking at this now globally because we're doing climate change analysis all around the world. And so we're going to keep track of storms and try to do the kind of analysis you do here in the US, everywhere else in the world. So that complicates things, a lot more going on everywhere else. So, obviously keep that in mind, but are there any other things you want to say about this issue that we didn't cover or we should be thinking about?
Maybe one short-term thing I'll say is that uh, because of the pandemic and because people are working from home more, just more broadly, and have, even if people have gone back to the office, they've gotten more comfortable working from home. My tech issues today notwithstanding, that it's less disruptive to have to stay home and to be unable to commute than it might have been even 5 years ago. Right. So that actually the lost output piece of this. So I agree with you about rebuilding being more challenging right now, but I think the lost output associated with these storms, which does make its way into GDP, there could be an opportunity to sort of overcome that a little bit more than in the past. The key kind of variable about whether that happens or not is whether there are power outages. Right. So if power goes out, then you're out of luck and you can't work regardless. But if you can't get back and forth, whether it's a snowstorm or a hurricane, but you're home and your power's on, you can actually do your job if you are working in it, if you typically work in an office type of setting. And so that does mitigate the hit a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. It's a wonderful point. I mean, post pandemic or, because of the pandemic, many more of us are now able to work from home and and to work more adeptly at home. So that should help to mitigate some of the fallout here. That's a great point. Okay. Ryan, anything else on this subject? Because again, I know you've done a lot of work here as well. Any other thoughts on the economics of natural disasters? And we
It's
should
just
move
that
on.
every natural disaster is different. The consumer behavior around snowstorms is different than, hurricanes, for example. So Adam, he has to adjust his methodology of how he calculates the economic cost based on the type of natural disaster, either a hurricane, snowstorm, wildfire. I don't, I don't think there's a natural disaster that we haven't tried to estimate the economic cost for yet.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, good point. Yeah, you wrote a nice paper a few years ago that made that very clearly. It depends on the disaster. Okay. Well, I think we're going to call it a podcast. I do want to remind the listener to give us a rating. I haven't said that in a while, but we like to see those ratings, and any feedback you have would be helpful. And also we'd like to hear from you about future ideas for podcasts. So you can go to economy.com, go to Inside Economics. There's right at the top of economy.com, and vote on different subjects that you would like us to opine on, get guests for, and that would be very helpful as well. So thank you for that, for your participation. So with that, unless Ryan, Adam, anything else to add? Good. Okay, we're going to call this a podcast. Take care, everybody.